January 1945. Near the Rhine River. The air is cold, damp, and heavy with smoke. In the darkness, German reconnaissance aircraft circle low over the Western Front. Below them, floodlights briefly flare through the fog. What they reveal appears unmistakable. Long columns of American tanks parked nose to tail, artillery batteries dug into frozen earth, trucks lining muddy roads as far as the eye can see. Antennas bristle. Engines seem to idle. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of troop movement drifts across the night air. German observers sketch quickly. They photograph what looks like an entire U.S. armored division assembling for a major river crossing. Reports are sent east before dawn. Maps are marked. Reserves are shifted. Orders are rewritten. But on the ground, there are no tank crews warming engines, no artillerymen loading shells, no divisions waiting to attack. What the pilots saw was rubber, canvas, and carefully placed light. What they heard came from speakers mounted on trucks miles away. And the soldiers responsible, few in number, lightly armed, were already preparing to vanish before daylight. The illusion would hold just long enough. And somewhere beyond the fog, the real American army was already moving. By the winter of 1944, the war in Europe had entered its final, brutal phase. The Allied landings in Normandy the previous June had shattered Hitler's Atlantic Wall, but they had not ended the fight. Instead, the Western Front stretched into a grinding campaign of movement, counterattack, and attrition across France, Belgium, and into the German frontier. The German army was wounded, but far from blind. Despite heavy losses, German intelligence still relied on a familiar triad: aerial reconnaissance, radio intercepts, and human observation. Fast-moving aircraft photographed roads and rail lines. Signals units listened obsessively for patterns in Allied radio traffic. Analysts in rear headquarters tried to assemble fragments into a picture of Allied intent. It was imperfect, but often just accurate enough to be dangerous. The Allies understood this. They also understood something more troubling. By late 1944, manpower was becoming a serious concern. Infantry divisions were worn thin. Replacement troops arrived with minimal training. Casualty lists grew longer after battles like the Hurtgen Forest and the Bulge. Every frontal assault carried a cost the Allies could no longer afford casually. The solution was not always more force, but smarter force. Deception had already proven its worth. In 1943, Allied planners had used elaborate misinformation to disguise the invasion of Sicily. In early 1944, Operation Fortitude convinced German high command that the Normandy landings were a feint, delaying the movement of German armored reserves at the critical moment. These successes were not accidents. They were carefully engineered illusions, designed to exploit how the enemy thought, observed, and reacted. But there was a problem. Large deception operations were slow to build and difficult to adjust once underway. They relied on months of planning, vast bureaucratic coordination, and rigid execution. As Allied armies pushed deeper into Europe, the battlefield became fluid. Front lines shifted weekly, sometimes daily. Commanders needed deception that could move as fast as tanks and infantry. They needed a force that could appear where no force existed and disappear before the truth arrived. At the same time, German commanders faced a dilemma of their own. Fuel shortages limited movement. Air superiority belonged to the Allies. Radar coverage was inconsistent. This forced German planners to trust what they could see and what they could hear. A photographed tank park often mattered more than a rumor. A reported concentration of armor could pull entire divisions out of position. This dependence created vulnerability. Allied intelligence officers began to see deception not as a strategic luxury, but as an operational weapon, a way to hold enemy units in place, a way to redirect artillery fire, a way to protect real formations by creating false ones, and above all, a way to save lives by convincing the enemy to fight shadows instead of soldiers. What was missing was a unit built solely for that purpose, one that did not merely support deception, but embodied it. That realization would soon lead to one of the most unusual formations ever created by the United States Army, and it would change how wars could be fought without firing a shot. The idea took shape quietly, far from the front lines. In January 1944, the U.S. Army authorized the creation of a unit unlike any it had fielded before. Its designation sounded ordinary enough: the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Its mission was anything but. This formation would exist for one purpose only: to deceive the enemy at the tactical level, close to the battlefield, where mistakes could be fatal and success could reshape entire operations. The men selected for the unit did not resemble conventional soldiers. Many were drawn from art schools, architecture programs, advertising firms, and sound engineering backgrounds. Some had studied painting in New York. Others worked in theater, radio production, or industrial design. A few had never fired a weapon in combat before arriving at training. What they shared was an unusual skill set: the ability to create convincing illusions. Training began in secrecy. The soldiers learned how German reconnaissance units operated, how Luftwaffe pilots photographed terrain, how Wehrmacht analysts interpreted shadows and spacing. They studied the habits of enemy intelligence officers, what details mattered, what could be ignored, and what would trigger alarm. Every illusion was designed not to fool everyone, but to fool the right people. The unit was divided into specialized components. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers handled visual deception. They worked with inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and aircraft made of rubber and canvas. When properly placed, these decoys cast realistic shadows, reflected light correctly, and could be erected in minutes. From the air, they were nearly indistinguishable from real equipment. The 3,132nd Signal Service Company managed radio deception. Their operators impersonated entire divisions over the air, copying call signs, message rhythms, and procedural habits of real units. German listeners, trained to detect patterns, heard exactly what they expected to hear. The most unusual element was the 3,133rd Signal Service Company Special, responsible for sonic deception. Using powerful loudspeakers mounted on trucks, they projected recorded sounds of armored columns, bridge construction, and troop movement. These recordings had been made earlier in the war, capturing real units in motion. At night, sound carried far, sometimes up to 15 miles, creating the impression of mass where there was none. To complete the illusion, soldiers were trained in performance. They wore divisional insignia of units they were pretending to be. In cafes and villages, they spoke loudly about false troop movements, knowing German informants were listening. They drove marked vehicles in deliberate patterns, careful never to overplay their role. Above all, the Ghost Army worked close to danger. They often operated within artillery range of German positions. Their equipment offered no protection against shells. If discovered, they had little means of defense. In May 1944, the unit arrived in England. Within weeks of the Normandy landings, they crossed to France. Their war would not be fought with bullets, but with timing, placement, and belief. And soon, their illusions would be tested against an enemy desperate for clarity in a collapsing world. The soldiers of the Ghost Army lived in constant contradiction. They wore uniforms and rank like any other unit, yet their survival depended on pretending to be someone else. One night, they were a mechanized division. The next, an armored corps. Their insignia changed as often as their locations. Many were barely out of their teens. They slept beside inflatable tanks that deflated silently in the cold. They knew that if German patrols pushed forward unexpectedly, their deception would collapse in seconds. There were no trenches to fall back into, no heavy weapons to hold a line, only speed and secrecy. Fear was constant, but it was quiet. These men could not afford panic. Every movement had to look routine. Every mistake risked exposing the illusion. They learned to live with the strange knowledge that thousands of enemy soldiers might be watching them, believing in an army that did not exist. The tactical angle. From a tactical standpoint, the Ghost Army functioned as a movable wall. By simulating large formations, they fixed German units in place. Divisions that might otherwise redeploy were held back, guarding against attacks that would never come. This allowed real American units to maneuver elsewhere with reduced resistance. Operations were timed precisely. Inflatable equipment appeared shortly before dawn reconnaissance flights. Radio traffic intensified during known German listening periods. Sonic units operated at night, when sound replaced sight as a dominant sense. Each deception was synchronized with real troop movements happening miles away. The technological angle. Technology made the illusion credible. Inflatable Sherman tanks could be assembled in under 20 minutes. Their proportions were exact. Their surfaces were treated to reflect light realistically. Sound trucks carried amplifiers powerful enough to project a clatter of armor, the shouts of engineers, the metallic echo of bridge construction across frozen ground. None of it was random. Every sound, shadow, and signal was measured. Together, these elements formed a weapon without precedent, one that attacked perception instead of positions. And as the Ghost Army's confidence grew, so did the scale of its deception. On the German side, intelligence officers were under immense pressure. By late 1944, the Western Front was collapsing unevenly. Some sectors were quiet. Others erupted without warning. With fuel scarce and air cover weak, German commanders leaned heavily on reconnaissance reports to decide where to commit their remaining reserves. Photographs mattered. So did patterns. When aerial images showed armored concentrations forming near a river crossing, analysts assumed an attack was imminent. When radio intercepts suggested divisional headquarters were active, staff officers marked those locations as priorities. The Ghost Army fed directly into these expectations, not by inventing something new, but by reinforcing what German intelligence already believed should be there. As a result, entire German units were ordered to hold ground against phantom threats. The leadership angle. Allied commanders understood the risks. Deception units required trust at the highest levels. If the illusion failed, real troops could be exposed elsewhere. Yet senior officers approved these plans repeatedly, recognizing that deception could achieve what artillery sometimes could not: delay confusion and misallocation of enemy strength. The Ghost Army reported directly through special channels. Their operations were coordinated with Corps and Army headquarters. Every illusion had a clear operational purpose tied to real movements on the front. The moral and psychological angle. There was an ethical tension in fighting a war with lies. The Ghost Army's mission was to manipulate fear, to create the threat of violence without delivering it. Yet the outcome was often fewer deaths on both sides. German units fired artillery at empty fields. Allied divisions crossed rivers with reduced opposition. The soldiers understood this paradox. Their deception was not cowardice. It was a different form of courage. Standing in the open, armed with nothing but belief, hoping the enemy would never look too closely. As winter turned to spring, the stakes increased. The Ghost Army was about to take part in its most ambitious deceptions yet, operations that would influence the final battles on German soil. And in those moments, illusion and reality would collide. March 1945. The western edge of Germany. The Rhine River stood as the final natural barrier between the Allied armies and the German heartland. Its crossings were narrow, exposed, and predictable. German commanders knew this. They expected the Americans to strike where bridges already existed or where terrain allowed rapid, armored movement. Every likely crossing point was watched. This was where the Ghost Army was sent. In the days before the Allied assault, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops moved into position near the town of Viersen, north of Dusseldorf. Their assignment was clear and dangerous: impersonate the U.S. Ninth Army in full strength. Not a battalion, not a brigade. An entire army preparing to force a crossing of the Rhine. Inflatable tanks appeared in fields overnight. Artillery shapes lined forest edges. Dummy headquarters tents were erected. Radio operators began transmitting constant traffic, orders, acknowledgments, routine chatter, using the call signs and habits of real Ninth Army units. German intercept stations lit up with activity. At night, sound trucks rolled into position. Through the cold air came the unmistakable noise of heavy engineering equipment. Pontoon bridges being assembled, trucks reversing, men shouting instructions. The soundscape of an army preparing to attack. German reconnaissance flights confirmed it visually. Analysts matched photographs with intercepted radio signals. Everything aligned. What they did not see was the truth. The real Ninth Army was assembling miles south, near Wesel. There, under General William Simpson, American engineers were preparing one of the largest river crossings of the war. Timing was critical. Surprise was essential. For 2 weeks, the Ghost Army held its position. German artillery shelled empty fields. Defensive units remained fixed, waiting for an attack that never came. German commanders hesitated to redeploy, unwilling to abandon what appeared to be a major threat. On March 23, 1945, the real assault began away from the illusions. By the time German units realized the deception, Allied forces had already secured bridgeheads across the Rhine. The final barrier was broken, and the Ghost Army, having done its work, packed up its illusions and disappeared before dawn. But this was not the end. As Germany collapsed inward, deception would continue to shape the final weeks of the war. Right up to the moment silence replaced gunfire, the German response came too late and in fragments. Once Allied forces crossed the Rhine in strength, the illusion unraveled quickly. Reports from the front contradicted reconnaissance photographs. Units sent to counter the supposed threat near Viersen found no American armor advancing. Artillery fire struck nothing of consequence. The realization spread quietly through German command channels. They had been preparing for a battle that did not exist. By then, the damage was done. Across multiple crossing points, American infantry and armor poured eastward. Engineers worked without the expected pressure from German counterattacks. Bridges were expanded. Supply columns followed. What should have been a desperate defensive stand became a rapid Allied penetration into Western Germany. The Ghost Army continued operating even as the front collapsed. In some sectors, they simulated withdrawals, suggesting American forces were pulling back when in fact they were advancing elsewhere. In others, they created the illusion of regrouping units, convincing German commanders to wait for attacks that never came. Each deception stole time, hours, days, that Germany could no longer afford. German reserves were exhausted. Fuel shortages crippled mobility. Command cohesion weakened as communications broke down under Allied air superiority. The Ghost Army did not cause these failures, but it exploited them with precision. Illusion magnified collapse. For the soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the danger never fully faded. German artillery occasionally bracketed their positions. Patrols moved closer than expected. One mistake could have exposed everything. Yet the illusion held, operation after operation, until resistance thinned into scattered pockets. By April 1945, the Western Front no longer resembled a front at all. It was a moving tide. Cities fell in rapid succession. German units surrendered in groups, sometimes without firing a shot, uncertain where the real American forces were concentrated. When news of Hitler's death reached the field at the end of the month, the Ghost Army was still active. Their final deceptions helped mask Allied movements as the war staggered toward its end. And when surrender came, it arrived not with final illusion, but with silence. The deception had served its purpose. What remained was a reckoning. The results of the Ghost Army's work were not measured in captured ground or enemy casualties, but in what never happened. Across Western Europe, German artillery shelled empty fields instead of advancing infantry. Defensive units remained fixed against phantom threats, while real Allied formations moved unopposed elsewhere. In several operations, American commanders later noted unusually light resistance in sectors that intelligence had expected to be heavily defended. Those absences were not coincidences. After the Rhine crossings, Allied intelligence assessments concluded that German forces had significantly overestimated American strength in multiple areas. Reports recovered after the war showed German commanders believed they were facing far more divisions than actually existed. Entire armored units were held back, waiting for attacks that never came, while Allied spearheads advanced rapidly through weakened lines. The human cost avoided was substantial, even if impossible to calculate precisely. Fewer contested crossings meant fewer engineers killed under fire. Fewer counterattacks meant fewer infantry units cut down in open ground. In a war where minutes could mean thousands of lives, deception bought time, and time saved soldiers. For the Ghost Army itself, there was no public recognition. Their work remained classified. Soldiers returned to conventional duties, or prepared for redeployment without ceremony. They could not explain what they had done or why it mattered. Official reports referred only to special operations, without detail. Some German officers, interrogated after capture, expressed confusion that lingered even after the fighting ended. They spoke of American formations that appeared powerful, organized, and aggressive, units that history would later show never existed. The success of the Ghost Army forced a quiet reevaluation within Allied military planning. Deception was no longer just a pre-invasion strategy. It had proven effective at the tactical level, close to the enemy, under direct threat. Yet, when the war ended in Europe in May 1945, the unit simply dissolved. Its impact, like its presence, faded into obscurity. But the story was not over. Decades passed before the story of the Ghost Army became widely known. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops remained classified under wartime secrecy, their records tucked away in military archives. Veterans returned to civilian life. Artists, musicians, actors, carrying memories of nights spent inflating rubber tanks under artillery fire, of driving Phantom convoys across fields, of projecting the sounds of massive armies that did not exist. Many never spoke of their service. Some could not, for fear of revealing still classified operations. Yet when historians finally pieced together the evidence, the unit's achievements were extraordinary. It was estimated that the Ghost Army staged more than 20 major deception operations between 1944 and 1945, sometimes involving thousands of visual, sonic, and radio decoys in coordinated campaigns. Their efforts contributed directly to the rapid Allied advance across the Rhine and the reduction of casualties during critical crossings. Reports from captured German officers confirmed the effectiveness of these illusions. Entire divisions had been tied down responding to armies that existed only on canvas and sound recordings. The legacy of the Ghost Army went beyond statistics. Their work represented a new dimension of warfare, where imagination, psychology, and artistry became tools of strategy. The idea that a handful of soldiers could manipulate the perception of thousands challenged traditional military thinking. It revealed that deception could save lives, shape movements, and influence the course of battles without a single shot fired. And yet, for those who had lived it, the war had never felt imaginary. Fear, danger, and tension were very real. The illusion was a shield for others, a silent protector in a world defined by violence. By the time the Allies entered Germany proper, the Ghost Army had already faded into memory. Its name unknown, its deeds unrecognized, but its impact indelible. Their story, once buried in secrecy, would eventually emerge as one of the most remarkable examples of ingenuity and courage in modern warfare. The Ghost Army reminds us that war is fought not only with steel and gunpowder, but with perception. In the fields of Western Europe, imagination became a weapon, a rubber tank, a carefully recorded sound, a well-placed radio transmission. These were enough to shape the decisions of generals, to redirect armies, and to save lives. Their story also reveals a quieter kind of courage. The soldiers who operated these illusions stood exposed, knowing that discovery could mean death. They risked themselves without firing a shot, relying on artistry, precision, and timing. It was a war waged in shadows and echoes, where human creativity met the harsh realities of conflict. Historically, the Ghost Army challenges conventional narratives of heroism. Victory is often measured in territory taken or enemies defeated. But here, victory came from absence. The absence of destruction, the absence of confrontation, and the absence of enemy advantage. History remembers the battles, the tanks, the artillery, but it is slow to remember those who shape reality itself. Ultimately, the Ghost Army exemplifies the idea that perception shapes action. By convincing the enemy of a power that did not exist, these men altered the course of war. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that transcends strategy, that intellect, creativity, and courage can be as decisive as any weapon on the battlefield. In the quiet aftermath, long after the guns fell silent, the truth remained. Sometimes the greatest victories are invisible, and the most profound battles are fought in the mind.